Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today.
It does sound sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah.
With the ACE community for 3 years now.
Actually outlined everything.
Something that we find in the society.
First, talk about the problems that you're trying to solve.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We are here with another episode of Deep Random Talks with a topic that is very, very exciting and a guest that it has been part of our community for quite some time, and we have seen a lot of interesting practices that he has in managing his own personal knowledge. So we are excited to talk to him about this topic and learn his tips and tricks. But before that, Ammar, my co-host today, what's new with you?
Just earlier this week, I finished an exhausting design sprint. So I'm still recovering, but besides that, well.
Fantastic. I'm very excited to see what you designed when it is finalized. Ozan, how about you introduce yourself, please, for our audience and tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm currently a PhD candidate at Reyes University. My research mainly focuses on deep learning-based interpretable time series models. And I'm currently at the third year of my PhD. I've been with the ACE community for 3 years now. I was working with the time series discussion group. And also I've been using this knowledge management tools for the past 5 years at least. And I spent a good amount of time looking at comparing and contrasting and learning more about the knowledge management field.
Awesome. So your PhD is in explainable time series and you're wrapping that up. What is next?
I'm planning to move into the industry.
Awesome. So if you're looking for an awesome researcher, scientist, you know who to call. Awesome. I'm drinking some cold brewed mint tea. How about you all?
I have an Earl Grey tea, which is my favorite.
So do you just usually drink black tea?
Yeah, in the mornings, just to wake up.
Cool. How about you, Ammar?
Usually I'm on black tea, but today I have this boutique chai tea. It was from this guy who was trying to make it big in the tea business. The tea was normal, but I just love the guy's energy, so I had to buy it.
All right, there you go. You sometimes buy new things because you love the guy who's selling it. Awesome. So, Ozan, we wanted to talk to you about your practices in personal knowledge management. And of course, as you said, you didn't start where you are today. Like the story started many, many years ago. So take us back to those early days. Like what was happening before you started thinking seriously about managing your knowledge properly? Like what was the world like? What were you up to? And take us back there.
Yeah, sure. So I think my knowledge management journey starts in high school. Like before using the actual knowledge management tools, I had a problem with memorizing facts basically in high school. So I remember a specific event in high school in my second year. I took a history exam and I got the lowest grades ever, lowest grade that I had in high school. So I was really frustrated, and I realized that I can't keep these facts in my mind. And because they needed us to memorize a lot of facts, different wars, lots of historical facts, dates, and we were asked about these in the exam. And then that led me to find. I had to figure out a way to solve this, and I started looking into memorization techniques. There are lots of nice books about it. I remember reading this book called Moonwalking with Einstein, which contains a lot of knowledge about memorizing different types of information. And I remember two specific types of things that I learned. So one was the PEG system, which basically creates a mapping between numbers and letters, and then you can use that to turn numbers into basically words. You can turn a date into words, and then you can create stories with these words, and then you can use that story to remember that number again, that date or number, any kind of number again. And then I also learned about stories, how to visualize the stories. And I remember turning my history books, different chapters of my history books, into drawings. So I was taking these different wars, and then I was creating symbols for different information, and then I was just creating mappings, these nice visualizations of the book. And then that's like improved. That improved my grades a lot. So I was quite happy at the time. And it helped me tremendously while I was preparing for the university entrance examination. So I think that's the first chapter. And then I go to university. So at the time, like I was using these memorization techniques a lot. So I remember like learning the 50 states in US in like alphabetical order, memorizing it. And then I also memorized the like presidents, again, like many presidents and the dates that they served. But at the same time, I started to realize, okay, like I'm learning this stuff, but even though I create these stories which allow me to memorize these long list of facts, if I don't regularly recall these stories, then I will eventually forget them. Because these facts, they are not grounded, they are not linked to the rest of my, to what I know. There are no like dense connections, so I don't regularly remember this information.
Interesting. So if I may summarize what you said, so the beginning was really all about memorization. So sort of like trying to repeat the information that was provided to you. So, and I want to draw a bit of contrast between that and knowledge management. So your purpose at the beginning, high school, early university, was all about, can I retain the information that is provided to me, aka memorize it and then reproduce it later when needed, versus what we will talk about later, and how this evolved, is all about knowledge management, which means that how can I retain information and then do inference and reasoning based on that. Is that roughly right?
The first one is like short-term memorization. It works great for exams, but if you need to understand that information, if you need to use that information in a creative manner, then that's not enough. Of course, you have to link them, and you have to spend time on that information, and you have to summarize it so that it turns into an understanding.
Okay. So essentially the problem statement that you were first going for was getting better grades. And that
was the goal.
Yes, very, very organic, very authentic. And that was the case until university.
Yeah.
So did that, well, you are still in university technically, but did that morph over as you went to higher studies and PhD, or did it remain the same for you?
So, I was still using some of it preparing for exams, especially if I don't want to remember, like if I don't want to use that information. If I'm preparing just to remember, then I can use that. But like I started to realize, like I need to remember this information. Like what I'm learning here is very important. So at the same time, I was also started reading about a bunch of different fields. So I love to read like newest things in science. So I'm like subscribed to Daily Science. So I read a bunch of science articles every day. I also like to read about nutrition and like psychology, all these topics. And I was reading like different blog posts, books, but because I'm not studying in that field, in those areas, I learn in like my work sessions are basically these small packets that are like happening in random times. So I'm not preparing for actual exams, and I'm not recalling that information regularly. So I needed to find a way to link those information that I written down or like thought about in different random time slots, and I so that I can retain that information, right? So to like make it more, to give an example, so one day I'm reading about the dopamine circuits in a book, and then the next day I'm reading about the relation between a specific diet and like the dopamine levels. So while I'm thinking about that, if I can access the notes that I took about the dopamine system, I can just quickly skim that information, and that will help me tremendously. And it will help me remember both of these informations because now they're linked. And I'm now actively recalling them as I continue to study more and more.
Interesting. So, to some extent, what you were saying is that the initial problem that you were trying to solve was memorization, but as you became more sophisticated in terms of the knowledge you were consuming, um, you got to a point where the linkage between different pieces of information became important to you. So it sounds like the problem that existed with the original solution hypothesis that for you was, taking notes and keeping track of everything and coming up with different types of patterns to associate, numbers to words and creating stories and things like that didn't work anymore because you needed different types of relationships to keep track of. And as you said, access so that you can very quickly look up a piece of information that you have previously found, and use it to either reinforce a piece of knowledge that you have or acquire a new piece of knowledge, became very important.
And just to give it a little bit more context, like before I figured a way to link these information, I started using Evernote just to have an archive of information, right? So I found this tagging system in Evernote. So I was like basically taking like screenshots, like not screenshots, but like taking copies of these blog posts that I read. I was putting my book summaries there. Like I had handwritten notes taken in lesson lectures. I put my handwritten notes there as PDF files, and I was putting tags into all these different pieces of information. And then, for instance, I have a tag for health, and then if I want to look for like my my notes about health, I can just filter that tag. So that was the original solution that I tried, and it was working well for like categorizing and like archiving the information. I was able to archive everything in a single place, so I can do it like text search easily. But over time, like I did this for like 3 years, and I had around like 300, so 1,300, 1,500 notes there. But I start to realize like this is not working because the information there, they are so separated, and I can't just easily move that. So they stay usually in separate places. Like for instance, notes about dopamine, they're staying in different places, and they're just like highlights. So it's always hard to like come back and read that information. So the accessing to that information took a lot of time. And then linking was also a problem. I was not able to link them well, and because of these two, I was not able to retain that information. So it was not easy to work with.
So essentially, you came across a linking problem. Like you had all of these great information packets, but how are they connected, and when essentially should you take out and route from something that you've written out months ago, for example. And that's interesting because our ACES product essentially has that knowledge graph and that connectivity focus as well. But what's your current solution hypothesis for that problem?
So linking was the main problem, I guess, but it was not the only problem. So also, like, I wanted to summarize the information. So there are cases like, so you have these bunch of articles, and then you want to study them more. So then what you can do is you can create a new file and then summarize them, right? But in Evernote, there is no easy way of linking that. So when you're summarizing it, you want to link the information to its original source. So whenever the summarization is not enough, you can just go back to the original source and remember the context. So these things were very hard in Evernote. So I had to use this because, like, I think, like, for a few years there was no better way of doing it. At least, like, I couldn't find one, and I was not actually looking into it a lot. But then when I started my PhD, this became a bigger problem. I realized, now the information is really, like, now I really have to link this information because I'm reading all these papers and they are talking about each other. They are talking about same concepts. So I want to see, if I'm reading about this deep neural network model, this new DNN architecture, I want to see which papers are mentioning about it, which papers I read are talking about it, what they said, and like what was my previous thoughts about that architecture, and like what did I discuss in my previous meetings about this architecture. So sometimes, like, maybe like at a conference, I wrote down a note about that architecture, and that can actually help me a lot 2 years later down the road while I was trying to implement that, when I'm trying to implement that model. So this became a big problem, and I started looking into current solutions. And at the time, I saw these new knowledge management apps coming up, and one was Rome Research. And the other one was Logsec, and then there's also Obsidian. So these three are, I think, the most popular knowledge management tools nowadays. So I started using Rome first, and I quickly realized this is a much better way to store and link information. So I started gradually moving my notes from Evernote to Rome Research. And like the main difference here is, like, we can talk later about how Rome or Logsec, these tools work. These two are also Obsidian. These are graph-based tools. So basically, whatever you put there, it's in a knowledge graph, and the natural order of the information is in a graph. So you can link. You're basically creating links all the time as you're writing down a note, and that allows an organic way of linking and retaining information. So do you want me to talk about? I can talk a little bit about Rome and Logsec, how these graphs work.
Before jumping into the minutiae, though, I did want to take a minute. Essentially, you mentioned that there were three problems that came up, or that you started to solve over your for your organization system: summarization, memorization, and then connectivity. Now, you've been working at it since you were in high school. But let's say that someone who's watching this is relatively new to the area. And they're like, you know what? I have those three problems as well, and I want some quick, low-hanging fruits in 2 weeks, for example. What are the concrete first steps that you would recommend to this person, ideally with some specific resources, to get them started in 2 weeks?
It's a good question, and I think the answer is simple. So the Rome Research, I think, has both Logsec and Rome Research. I would recommend these tools, and they have a very easy learning curve. So the idea is very simple. They have you have pages and you have tags, which is the same thing as pages. And then whenever you use a bracket, you create a link to a page. And then in each page, you have various blocks. And these blocks can be indented. And like you have a bunch of, each line is a separate block. And then whenever you use parentheses, then you can create links to blocks. So basically you have pages and blocks, and then you can create any kind of link between them. So what I would recommend is just use try one of these knowledge graph-based tools, and then start writing down everything, like the meetings, their course notes, try to keep everything in one place. And then whenever you think there's an important, you're mentioning an important concept, any kind of concept really, just create a tag for it. And then that tag will create a bidirectional link to that concept. So you will be able to, it requires some bit of time for it to become useful, right? Because like you're creating these links, but if you're taking notes about, like a DNN architecture, a deep neural network, then you have to take a bunch of notes about it for it to be useful. So when you look into it again, you can find your old notes and benefit from them. So just try that for you have to be patient. Maybe try it for 1 or 2 months, and then you will start to see the benefits.
Okay. So essentially starting off by having a basic Rome or Logisec tutorial. Then essentially you mentioned writing down everything. And that part was a bit confusing for me, because I want to push you there. When I think writing down everything, I think, for example, Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book, it essentially has different levels of writing down everything. So what level of detail, what level of capture, that's what I was thinking when you were saying that. And then regarding creating a tag for it, there's a billion ways on how to tag information. Are there some specific people that you took inspiration from, essentially the back end, the theory behind your organization system?
What you're saying is basically there are different ways, a million different ways to use these tools. And the good thing about these graph-based architectures is you need to figure out what works best for you. And there are a ton of resources online. I can remember some of them. I remember the blog RomBrain. It's a nice blog about different ways you can use these graph-based tools. I remember looking into a few YouTube channels, but we can just add them under the video. So I also want to mention, so because there are these different ways, you also have to think about that. But in the beginning, it's not that important. So people usually think that, okay, I have to create the perfect structure in the beginning so that everything works out perfectly. But it doesn't work like that. And your initial solution will never be perfect. And I was also worried about this a lot in the beginning. So before starting, I spent 2 days watching different videos. But it's not really that important. So you can start with some initial structure, and then as you're learning more about knowledge management, you can tweak the way you use your graph. Also, it's good to think about how are you going to use these nodes. So I have more of a archival type of personality. So I like to store everything that I learned, and it's my main goal is to retain that information and create a lot of links, and to find that information, even if it's a random node that I took 2 years ago, I want to be able to find that information very quickly. So that's what I'm optimizing for. But a different person, they might be optimizing for creative output. So they might be using this for writing a story, or they might be using this for creating blog posts. So a lot of people in the community, knowledge management community, they're using this for this type of creative output goal. So in that case, it might be more important to, it might be better to take shorter notes, which are like more condensed and meaningful, instead of writing down everything you learn about.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that the exact strategy you use to take notes and link them and summarize them, etc., is dependent on the use case that you have for why are you taking these notes. And there are a few different reasons that people do it. For example, for creative purposes, to write a blog post, create a video, etc. Could be for studying for exams, as your story started. Could be to write a paper, etc., etc. So when you were talking earlier, you said that there were three problems with memorizing techniques that you were using and force you to think more about linking, etc. And the two problems that you mentioned was access and linking. And based on the tools that you're recommending, you have figured out a way to solve that. But as you said, ultimately your goal was retention, and the ability, assuming as a PhD student, also the ability to be able to reason and infer and come up with new ideas. So for let's double click on that particular use case. So you wanted to do everything that you've been doing and everything that you have described to achieve better retention and better ability to reason and infer and come up with new ideas. Has your current system achieved that? And if so, can you give some examples of some interesting outcomes that you're seeing from your system?
All right, so I think like my current system achieves like most of my goals. So like the best thing about it is there is not much overhead to access the information and to link the information. So it's more, the process is very organic. The process of writing down is very organic. But like, of course, it still has some issues. So, okay, to give some examples. So let's say I want to look into notes about like omega-3 supplements and like depression. I can, in Rome, these are two separate concepts. So I can just, there are tags for these two concepts. So I can just create a query about omega-3 and depression, and then it will give me a list of notes where I talk about these two, where I wrote down about these two concepts. And you can also, like in Rome, you can say, okay, I want my notes which are about concept A and concept B, but not about concept C. So you can create these queries and that allow you to get access information very quickly. So that really reduces the friction of accessing the information. I feel like I went down from like ON squared to O1, right? I can just write the concept and just shoot. Or not O1 because it's not the exact information that I'm looking for. Maybe like if there's a BERT model that reads that and like it reads my brain signals and find the correct one, then that would be O1. For now, it feels more like O log n from ON squared. So it's like it feels like an exponential improvement. In terms of linking, like whenever I'm writing about something, I just add some links. It's very easy. So it solves most of this linking problem.
Recent example of something interesting that you saw using this method that otherwise you would not have noticed.
I was reading a book like a few months ago about debate tactics and like the history of debate. And there, like, I had a note about Plato and its ethics. Right? And then 6 months later, I'm reading a different book about or some lecture notes about like ethics, and then I'm taking a note about something else about Plato. Then I can just see that previous information about Plato's ethics, and just I'm able to link them. I can just, or if I'm writing a note about ethics, then I can just remember that information. But normally that book is not about that concept. So if I was using a tag-based system, like I did on Evernote, I wouldn't be able to see that information when I'm reading about Plato, or when I'm reading about learning about ethics. But because of these tags, I can just access that link, and that allowed me to serendipitously recall that information and basically retain it for a longer.
What you're essentially talking about is a rather sophisticated and refined use case. And I was just wondering that just a little bit earlier, you mentioned that Ammar, when you're starting off, just focus on something super simple. Don't think much about the theory. But then for most organization systems, including mine, I have a time where I sit down, say, for example, every week. I usually buy myself some bubble tea every Sunday. And that's when I essentially try to refine it and polish it. And I wanted to ask that for you, your essential weekly or monthly overhead.
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question, because I think many people are doing this in a very inefficient way. I was doing it more inefficiently as well. So I was actually between Evernote and Rome for a brief period of time. I tried to put everything on Notion, and there I had a weekly calendar page, and each week I create a new template. And because it's not dynamic, I have to change all the dates manually, and there was a lot of overhead. So the first thing I realized quickly is, if you put everything into a single app, it's it's much better, and it reduces the overhead significantly. So even if you're using more than one tool, try to I'm still using Notion for some things, but I try to use Rome as my starting point for everything. So whenever I need to move into a specific node, I can just jump in from there, and all the relevant, most important information stays there, so I can just quickly search and access them. What was the exact question?
I was asking, so that essentially decreases the overhead on a day-to-day basis.
Overhead, yeah. So
a weekly time or a monthly time where you sit down and okay, now I'm going to improve on it or clean it up.
So to give a more specific answer to your question, I have some templates, weekly templates and daily templates. So one advantage of these new graph-based tools, they created these programmable nodes. So basically, you can create. There is an extension called Smart Blocks, which are available, I believe, in all these three tools. So basically, you can create a program and you can execute it in your note-taking app. So you can create templates. So in the simplest way, the simplest example is you can create a template, and you can call that template. So whenever I'm having a meeting, for example, I'm just calling the meeting template, which has 4 sections. What should I to discuss, notes, key insights, and next steps. So I just call that template. Or if I'm taking if I need to create a weekly, reflection session, I'm not doing that regularly, but if I want to do something like that, I can just create a template. There are lots of free templates available online, and you can just paste that with 2 clicks with a keyboard shortcut, and then you can just start filling it. So that reduces the overhead significantly, because you don't have to manually copy paste select. But these programmable approaches take that a few steps further. What you can do is, for instance, I have a page for quotes. So whenever I see a nice quote about something, I just copy it there. So I take different quotes about life, stuff in general, the quotes that I highlighted in a book. And then every day when I create a daily template, when I call a daily template, it takes a random block from those list of codes and it brings it, it puts it into the daily template. So every day it's a different random block from that page. So you can do stuff like that. To take it even further, what you can do is you can run a JavaScript code in your note-taking app, and you can turn off the lights in your room, or you can just access to an API and pull down your I don't know, sleep insights or like tracker information. So like, yeah, there are a lot of possibilities here, and I believe like over the next few years we will see people using these programming approaches in the note-taking apps a lot more.
That is a very comprehensive and a very detailed breakdown. I want to just focus on one word you said there.
Yeah.
Every day. How did it become an everyday thing for you?
I think it becomes an everyday thing when you start to use it for your to-do, like to keep track of your to-do items. So if you're just taking notes about, like if you're just trying to create a knowledge base, then you don't have to access that daily, right? You can just like, after you read a book, you can just copy that information in there. And like once you learn something interesting, you can just move there. But yeah, one thing, like as we mentioned, is that if you do things in different places, then there's always an overhead. I'm taking, like let's say I had a to-do item for my PhD research, and that information is actually like, then I did some experiments about it. And then like I had some issues and I figured out ways to solve them. So if I keep that information away from my to-do item, there is always this overhead. Like I have to go back to my to-do list and update, okay, now I should try this, and then come back to the app and I tried this and it didn't work out, now I'm gonna try this. So I have to keep the same information and I have to have duplicates in these two different apps. And there's always an overhead. So I try to move everything into one place. So in addition to my knowledge base, I'm keeping the to-do items in the same place. Because of that, I have to access them daily. And I'm also doing this thing called like daily journaling. So like every day, I keep notes about, okay, like between these hours, I was working on that. Between these hours, I was working on that. So like if I wanna think about what I did last week, I can just come back to these notes and like have a better understanding. So during the day, I'm taking a lot of notes, but those daily notes, they are not linked, like they're not as important, like what I did between those few hours, but they're still there regardless. And it helps me keep things in place and access, it reduces the access time.
That's a very, like most folks talk about to build a habit, link it to a current habit. And that's a very interesting linkage you have. Like, for example, me personally, I linked it with my morning coffee and my Sunday bubble tea sessions. But you link it with your morning to-do list. So very, very good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, so I don't have a like a long weekly session to reflect on like everything. I try to minimize that time, but like I realize that like reflecting is very important to like keep improving your system. So I try to do that once in a while. So I have some templates. So if I have some free time, I want to do that, then I can just call that template. And then like there are some reflective questions there about previous week or previous month. And I try to answer them and like try to figure out ways to improve my overall system.
Very cool. So it sounds like you're collecting a lot of data about knowledge that is available to you and how you're dealing with it. And speaking of taking things further, have you considered using machine learning to either analyze your past data or, plan the future tasks or knowledge that you need, etc.?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I haven't, but like there are some, I'm following what's been happening. So when it becomes more easy to do like those type of adjustments. So currently it's in a graph system and the API, like I try to use the API a little bit it's not very easy to use. So currently there are still a lot of like technical challenges to make it easy to work with. But like I saw some people discussing it. There are also a lot of privacy concerns, like when you try to use, because like a lot of people they include a lot of private information there. So like when you use machine learning or other things, like it's very important how you train, which training data you use, and how you use this API. So I think like it will take a few years for those type of tools with machine learning to be common in these things. But currently, like there are like simpler stuff. Like I think there's also an app. There's also like programmable approach, a smart block to OCR. So if you have a like text, you can just you can just call that block, and it will read the image and create the text, like get the text from the image. I saw some like discussions about summarization. I think Google Docs will come with a summarization option very soon, and I think like that's a very important. Like I know we haven't touched that, but like summarization is very important. And one thing I like to do is, because we have this indentation in the notes, I try to compress the information on the upper level. So I create when I'm taking a book note, let's say this is the original source, then I create an indentation, and on the block top of that, I basically compress that information, and then on the block top of that, I compress even more based on like the parts that I need, like the parts that I need to remember most, and like the parts that are most important. So that's like, people do it in many different ways. I think it's called progressive summarization. So I think machine learning models can help a lot in that. It can create these automatic summaries of things, and they can create automatic highlights based on our previous data. So there are a lot of low-hanging fruits there.
I have a bit of a weird relationship with summarization. I understand the value of summarization for like news articles or things like that. You just want to get the gist of it and move on. But especially for technical topics, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but for technical topics, I think summarization usually makes me feel like there might have been something important, and this algorithm that is trained on summarizing news articles is going to miss a bunch of. So what I'm more interested to see is more information retrieval techniques rather than summarization, like techniques where you can ask a question of your notes and it tells you this is the answer, and this one sentence of it, and then click to see more of it, etc., etc. So rather than trying to regurgitate what I said in different words, but the question that I asked was a little malicious, I think, because the best way to get to the future is to build it, Ozan. I think you should consider building that feature. On that note, fortunately, we are running out of time, so we should start wrapping up. If people want to look at only one resource to learn about these topics, what do you recommend? What should they check out? Maybe Ozan and Ammar, both of you can answer that question.
Okay, so I can go first. So yeah, if they wanna learn more, I think like they can check out the links that we put under the video, and if they just want to check out one resource, they can check out this Wrong Brain website. It contains a very nice list of resources about knowledge graph-based knowledge management tools.
I would definitely want to check those out. A few additions I'd make to Ozan's list would be more on the back end of how to think about this. I'd probably check out Tiago Forte's work on the second brain. If you just want to give a quick skim, his Para article series, PARA. And if you're more interested in the summarization side, I would look at How to Read a Book by Jay Adler.
Perfect. So, last question: what's the verdict? What should people who have been listening to us for the past half an hour or so take away from this? How do you recommend they think differently about how they're doing and how they're dealing with their knowledge?
Yes. So if you're taking knowledge management, like if you want to take knowledge management seriously, if you're worried about retaining information, if you have trouble accessing your notes about something easily, so then check out these tools that we mentioned. I think they will help you a lot with these issues.
My 2 cents would always be to start somewhere and don't think too much about the details, much like what Ozan said. The first 2 weeks should just be kind of getting in the habit of recording stuff and having that regular improvement slot. Like I found that once I link like bubble tea to improvements, it certainly kind of ramped things up for me.
Don't spend too much time trying to learn how to optimize better. Like regulate your time between taking down notes and learning about how to take better notes.
Last time I tried to use that trick of rewarding myself for writing was when I was writing my PhD thesis, where I had this arrangement with a colleague in my lab that whenever we write a chapter, we'll go for ice cream. I gained 30 pounds, and those chapters were not written as fast as I wanted. So, anyway, on a more serious on a more serious note, yeah, definitely a lot of interesting topics that we talked about and touched on. These are very, very deep topics. There are a lot of interesting theory behind. More like frameworks, I would say, rather than theory, because a lot of these are empirical. Um, there's a lot of resources out there, and as Ozan said, if you want to take your personal knowledge management more seriously, you can definitely find a lot of information. And as Ammar said, doing it is more important than trying to find the best framework. So start doing it and be consistent, and that's how you'll pick up the habit and get better at it. But I think what I'm mostly excited about on this topic is where can we take this from here? What we're working on Aggregate Intellect is based on a lot of ideas we talked about. The fact that the amount of knowledge out there is growing exponentially, while our ability to consume that is not changing. So what I'm very excited to see, hopefully we can contribute building part of this future, but I'm also excited to see what other people will do. Is to take this outside of the personal, manual, super disciplined kind of area and bring it to areas where collaboration happens. Like people are collaborating on knowledge when they're building products or doing any other sort of scientific collaboration, for example. Can we start creating automation tools? Can we start using AI? In the spaces where knowledge is being completely doing ad hoc, completely handled in an ad hoc way, can we bring these disciplines to people without asking them to do anything in particular beyond their current workflows? So there are a lot of interesting ideas there. I'm excited to see what we can do. I'm excited to see what happens in the future in the area of knowledge management and navigation. Thank you so much, Ozan, for sharing your frameworks with us. It was a fun conversation, and Ammar, thanks for joining this call, or rather, this session. And thank you so much. Hope to see you in the next episode.